Hello ladies, gentlemen, welcome to another lesson. Today we are going to learn one of the best practices you can follow when working on a Laravel project. Our topic today is how you can implement repository pattern in your Laravel project. Before we get started, let me give you a simplified explanation of the repository pattern as regards how we want to implement it in this Laravel project. So the repository is the interface between the data source and the part of the code that want to interact with the data. For example, let's say you have a method in your controller that wants to get all the, let's say, motivational quotes, assuming you are building some motivational quotes application. So this controller method wants to fetch all the quotes we have, and controller 2 wants to do the same, right? Maybe in the past you used to write the entire logic to query the database, fetch some records, or maybe fetch some data from some third-party API or stuff like that. But instead of doing it that way, we are going to let the repository take care of that, right? Some of the benefits of using the repository pattern include that we have a central place to manage the logic for accessing our data instead of managing it at all the parts of the code that try to implement the same logic for accessing the data. Secondly, we can easily switch the data source, right, without having to change implementations or the logic for accessing the data in the clients, the controllers, or whatever that is accessing the data. We will actually demonstrate this in our Laravel project. Another benefit is that by removing those data access logic from the controller, our controller has become thin, right, because it has less codes now, making it easy to actually look at the controller methods and understand what is going on there. Now there are a whole lot of articles and resources out there that gives more details and theory about the repository pattern. I suggest that you do some Google search to learn more and go deeper into the theory and the explanations. But for now, let's just jump into the code and implement something similar to this. Back to the code. This is a Laravel project, a new Laravel project. I've not written any code there. So you create a Laravel project. The first thing, by the way, this tutorial assumes that you already know how to use Laravel, so we are not going to go into the how to create Laravel project, what is the model, controller, etc. So I'll go to the terminal. The first thing I want to do is just to make a model. It can be any model. Our focus is not on model. So I'll say PHP artisan make model. I'll call this quote a quote model. So basically I'll open the quote model. I'll protected field level submask assignable fields. We are not going to save anything in database, so there's no need to creating some migration files. So the quote and the author, something basic just for demonstration purposes. The next thing I want to do is to make a controller quote controller. So I'll go to the controller. I want to create a method that will fetch all the codes that we have, whether it's from database or some third-party source. So public function, I'll call the method index. So this brings us to the gist of the matter. Perhaps previously what you do in this controller method is to write some logic, for example, to get all the codes from your database using Eloquent. So for that you can say quote all, right? Quote all. But according to our little sketch here, we are saying that we should not write the logic to talk to the database in the controller. Instead, we should let the interface, we should let the repository take care of that. So because of that, we are not going to have this line of code here, right? What I would do instead is to go to app folder and create another folder called repository. And inside this folder, I want to make our interface this very one here. So I'll just create a file. I like to start with the name, the interface file with I, so I can easily tell that this is an interface and not a class. So quote repo.php, and here namespace is app/repository interface quote repo. So what I want to have here is the method signature function, let me call it all. This will return an array. The array will be the list of all the codes that we have in the data source, right? Then I will go back to the controller. Here I will make a constructor, public function construct. I'll have a private member, quote, that is for the repo. Quote repo, and also have it here. Quote repo. Just want to have quote repo. So I will say this quote repository to be quote repository. So what do I want to do here? I want to access the data from the repository and not from the database directly or whatever data source. So what I will do here is to say that quotes, come on, this quote repo all, right? So you can see the difference that previously we said that quotes, we went to quote model through Eloquent, trying to query the database directly. But we are saying that the better way we can do this is using the repository. I can just return a JSON response here. Response JSON, some data to be our code, maybe additional information like status. These are just some information I choose to return, right? And message query. So the key thing here is that we are getting the quotes from the repository, right, based on our sketch here. So how does this repository work? How do we tell Laravel to make use of this? We have not actually created any class that implements this quote repo interface. So what we want to do here is to add a class, this time not an interface. I will call this quote repo.php, and once again php namespace app/repository. So class quote repo implements. So this class, this quote repo, we implement the interface iQuote repo. So we have a method there that is to fetch all the quotes that we have. Let me actually copy that. What do I want to do? Let's assume that we want to get this quote from the database, right? So I can quickly use Eloquent here and say return. Okay, because we didn't connect to database, so I will just fake some result. Actually, let me say quote to be new quote, just some Eloquent model. And our code has two fields. It has a code and it has author. So what will be the code? If it were easy, everyone do it. The author, Tom Hanks. Okay, so we have return the quotes. Oh, we're supposed to return the array of quotes. So we are fetching some quotes from the database, right? And in our controller, we are making use of quote repo. Now to tell Laravel to make use of this class whenever we are making use of the interface, the quote interface, iQuote repo interface, we need to make a service provider. Let me quickly do that. Repository service provider. With that created, I will go to app providers. We have our repository service provider. Here, what I want to do is to register to register our code repo interface. Actually, let me go ahead and do this. App bind. So basically, we're going to tell Laravel that whenever we need this interface, it should instantiate, it should make use of the code repo, that is the implementation that implements this interface, the code repo class, right? This is how you tell Laravel what implementation of this interface will be used in controller. Okay, so let me quickly go to the routes API and I'll remove this. I don't need it. Get quote controller class, and the method will be index. So when we hit this endpoint, I want to call the method we have in our quote controller, this method, which is going to return all the quotes that we have in our data source. Now let me head over to Postman and call the endpoint to get all the quotes. So this will be a get request. I'll call the endpoint send. Okay, so I need to start the server. We have not started the server. I'll try this again. Something went wrong. So I can I quote first. Let me correct this. I just noticed that the interface started with small letter I instead of the capital letter. So I will do search and replace. This should be uppercase, not lowercase I. Search, replace, cross check the files. Okay, so I can just replace all this. Just replace that. Let me try this. Okay, now so I've seen where the error is coming from. We're supposed to register the provider in the providers array. So when you go to config and you go to scroll down to providers, here let's register our providers. What is our repository class? Now let's go back to Postman and try one more time. Okay, so this time we get our response from here, from the controller. But which brings us to the next thing. One of the benefits of using the repository is that we can make changes here. For example, we can actually change our data source, say from database to file or whatever data source, and we don't need to modify our controller to when we effect those changes or to effect the changes, right? To demonstrate that, what I will do is to make let me call it another data source, right? Let me actually copy this file. I will copy that file. I'll copy the file and paste. I will rename this. Let me say, let's assume that we are getting the code from file. I know it might not make sense to actually be saving the code in the file instead of other data source like a database. But all we care to know is that we have another data source code repo file.php, which is what we have here, right? And this time the data is coming from maybe a file or something like that, not from Eloquent, not from the database. So let me actually add one more quote. My quote, why not? Author is me. So we have another data source, right? Let's assume that this is some application that you have finished working on, and your boss decides, let's actually not use database anymore. Let's use some third-party APIs to fetch codes, right? It must not be file. It could be any other source. So we can easily swap our source of data through the repository implementation. All I have to do is go back here and change this. This is just a way to tell Laravel to use this file whenever we need a class that implements the interface, the repository interface, right? So I'll go back to Postman. You can see that we get the data which is now coming from this, right? So that saves us a lot of work and refactoring and potential bugs that we might introduce if we have to change every place that we access the data. So this is what we have so far. It doesn't matter whether it is one controller that I've used so far for this demonstration or multiple controllers. I believe you get the idea. So please hit the like button if you think any of these makes sense so far, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And that will bring us to the end of this lesson. I will encourage you to actually take your time to dig deeper, to read more and understand the repository pattern in greater detail. Until next time, thank you.